Ashley tells me we have some people streaming, so welcome for those of you that are joining us online, and those of you here. It's part of, I'm going to do a presentation, but I'm really looking at getting some dialogue going, because this is a draft, so we really need to take a look at these recommendations and change them and put priority on them. I've tried to also identify recommendations which are achievable and aren't expensive or can be done in a short period of time. I can date myself a little bit in that I came to Happy Valley long enough ago that I bought a fully furnished 3-bedroom house for $4,500. So that puts a bit of perspective of how old I am. And I've recently, for just over 6 years, worked in Nain with the Nazi government. And the thing I enjoyed there is that in Nain, they treat elders with respect. And I've been back in St. John's, and that's definitely not the case in St. John's. So it's an opportunity here to have a little bit of a discussion on a topic which is it doesn't get a lot of discussion, but which is fundamental to economic development. And one of the points I'll make is that we're all in the business of encouraging economic development and creating new enterprises, but saving an enterprise is just as important as creating a new one, and should be a measure of success. So I'll touch on that. Again, this is the information that we've just talked about in terms of the population project. And for those of you who haven't had an opportunity to be connected with it, it's really a valuable tool for all of us, and in particular in the regions that we're of the province and further away from St. John's, to really begin a dialogue. And the Labrador situation, as I'll identify, is considerably different from the situation on the island. So So the area that I looked at with the 5 sub-regions in Labrador and 1 region, the northern tip of the Northern Peninsula, basically the area that Labrador-Grenfell River IGA serves. And so one of the things that came up is the difficulties in succession planning and the issue of population trends that Keith talked about, the changing population. The issues of community sustainability, and many communities are, especially some of the smaller communities, are wrestling with sustainability. We know the economy is changing, and it continues to change, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And again, the sustainability of existing businesses is just as important as supporting new startups. So 6 regions, 18 case studies, a cross-section of business sectors, and I've spent time probably more than necessary, but it's an interest that I have, is to really try to get a handle on what's happening in Labrador and the Labrador economy and the northern tip of the peninsula. There's not a lot of good information out there now, and just trying to consolidate it, because one of the things as I talk to businesses is that people really don't know what's going on. We don't really see the impact of Boise Bay very directly often. If you're sitting here, you don't see the impact of IOC very directly. The fishery, some of the, and I'll talk about some of the other economies which are growing, including the Aboriginal economy, which is changing the face of Labrador considerably over the last few years and will continue to do so. So the longer report, which will be released in the next few weeks, has a lot about the economy of Labrador and the Northern Peninsula, and hopefully will be useful, and will need to be updated, and we'll have some recommendations around that. So there's some recommendations which I'm going to run through the recommendations, and then I'd like to get some discussion so we really validate them or throw them out or change some wording or whatever you think is, rank them in terms of importance. And I've also identified some research needs. I think some areas that we really need to gather some more information to really look at what's going on in the region. So I looked at trying to determine, is succession planning an issue? People said it was. And then identify some successes and failures, and make recommendations which are achievable, and to encourage discussion on business sustainability and growth. What's it going to take to make it better in changing times, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises? So we're not dealing with IOC and Boise Bay in this study. We're dealing with the small business, small and medium-sized businesses that are the anchors in the Wabush Industrial Park, or they're in the around the communities here, or in sometimes a small business on the coast is critical to the sustainability of a community, or a critical part of the future of a community. So what we heard is that, or what I heard, is that we confirmed the need for dialogue on succession planning. We really need to put it on the agenda. Include chambers of commerce. We don't have the zonal boards anymore. There's not some of the discussion areas, but there are opportunities that will come up over the next while, and we should put succession planning and look at it from the sub-regions as well as from the broader region. And one of the things that became clear is that rural areas are disadvantaged. So the more rural and remote you are, the more disadvantaged you are in succession planning, because you're further away from the resources that can help you. And job retention and business retention is critical. So one of the things that became clear is that when you're living in Labrador, or you're living in the northern tip of the peninsula, professional advice is harder to get. It's harder to have lawyers and professional accountants who are specialists in tax issues. It's harder to get a valuation of a property. One of the critical factors is, what is the market value of a property if you're going to put it up for sale, or even to transfer it within a family and so on. Some value has to be put. And then there's big challenges. Ran into businesses that were having, big challenges around environmental issues associated with the business, and they hadn't factored that in, and so that the asking price was diminished substantially by the cost of environmental. And when you're dealing in a small, remote community, what is a quick little piece of work if you're living in St. John's becomes very expensive away from the major resources. So the recommendation here is that we really need a list of qualified professional business experts with regional experience on Labrador, and potentially, the CBDC and ACOA may be the key agencies to help, but there's others may be able to play a role in that, and everybody can benefit. But let's try to identify and build expertise. So there are the lawyers and accountants, and we've seen changing trends in terms of accountants. The big firms have bought up small firms. So you've got national firms here, but there's different people coming and going all the time. So you don't get the consistency of dealing with one accountant that you may have had for 25 years as the accountant for your business. So that's providing some challenges. So the whole area of expertise, and one of the things that experts we need is good data. And so we'll talk a little bit about the fact that anybody who's going to help a business needs access to good information, and for the most part that's not available, or not easily available. So one of the things we did find is that there is some amazingly good literature and resources available for business succession planning, whether it be family transfer within the family, whether it be transfer of a business to an employee, or whether it be an outright sale of the business. There's some good tools, and you can Google and get a lot of case studies. And BDC is a big player, and one of the things that I've just learned is that one of the challenges is the BDC is elsewhere, and the BDC person for Labrador has changed 3 times in the last year. So there's not a consistency there, but they are a really important player, and they need to be brought into and they're key to the partnership. The CBDCs are increasingly important, and we have 2 within the North-Tip CBDC and the Labrador CBDC that I dealt with. The banks play an important role. They've got some good tools, and there's lots of online articles. There's lots of best practices. There's lots of self-help kits. But accessing information, a lot of it is just not as relevant to, this is a unique situation here, and it's not easy to find material which is really good material in a remote rural area like and the unique spot that we have here. So another key recommendation that I've come up with is that, I have to give Rex Gowdy some credit here, because Rex helped with this idea. But the real need for mentorship of somebody to work with a business owner. So when you identify, and often, what happens here is it's a longer period of time from the time somebody decides to sell a business to the time an actual sale happens. And often it's a year, it's more than a year. And often what's required a couple of chairs over here. You grab that one there. So often what's required, we're just dealing with the area of mentorship for businesses, and often is required is just somebody who can work with the business. One of the things I found when I talked to these 18 businesses is that people were amazingly open. People wanted to talk, and they shared some pretty confidential and critical information just about their business and the challenges and where they're going with their business, where the business might go. And they were really hungry for conversation. And what we need to do, I think, is match a mentor to have people who can come in and work with the business and guide them through. And there's programs that are identified here, the Canadian Executive Service Overseas, but it's actually been involved in Labrador many years ago. But these are retired business people who are available at cost to come in, and they've sold their own businesses, and often in rural and remote areas, and they can come in and work with the business and help guide, build a plan, and just be that mentor to help. So I think that is a fairly it's proven. It works. It's an economic development tool that works in other areas, and can be administered through existing systems. CBDC works with the COA on the CAS program, the Consulting Assistance Program now. This could probably be just an add-on to what already happens there, but maybe a partnership is negotiated with KESO or some organization. Maybe it's there's other organizations that perhaps could have. Some places it's schools of business and it's graduate students who do it. But often what was proved is that somebody who's worked for 30 or 40 years in their own business and has transferred that business is a real resource to somebody who has to do it. And so there's a real hunger out there for somebody to be available to talk, who knows business and is willing to, who can help guide and give the critical strategic information. So the ideal for many people is that somebody in the family takes over the business. In the natural succession, children are taking over the business from parents, or an employee. There's good case studies of employees taking over businesses, long-term employees who become part of the family and are naturals to take over the business. And there were some good success stories here with that. So, there's certainly some successes that are. Thank you. There's certainly some successes in transfer of business within families. There's one case study I saw where one group I met with where a son came home, had worked in the United States, came home, brought a whole bunch of new ideas to the business, and he's taking care of the core business, but he's building on the business. So the business will grow. in a new way, but it'll also be satisfactory to him because he's going to be doing some things that he really wants to do in his career. So he wasn't just following the template that the parents had set out. He was building his own mark on the business, and that's the kind of thing I think that we can and should use as success stories. And there's some best practices, and we run into the confidentiality thing, but I think somehow we've got to let the best practices be known out there when family succession or employee succession or the sale of a business, when it works, and what was the lessons learned from it. So again, basically, one of the things that came out as well is that, especially in rural and remote areas, it takes a lot longer to sell a business. So what might take a few months in an urban area can take a year or more, just because there's so many, the access to professional help, being able to, if you have to get a bit of environmental work done, that could eat up a few months alone, the extra costs associated with it all. So there's certainly some challenges in a timeline, and people should be geared up to the fact that plan ahead, and if you're thinking of selling your business, look at it from a few years out if you can, and if you can't, and if you're ready to sell and maybe something's come up and you need to sell, recognize that it's going to take a while. It's not going to be. It's not likely to be an overnight. Didn't see many cases where it happened quickly. It was a process. So again, the assistance in developing marketing plans and helping with timelines for business sale, and there's the CBDCs are doing some work with more online availability of information and so on too, and listings of businesses. So CBDC has an Atlantic site now where you can go and you can list your business, and often we need help. The business may need help to compact the description of the business into something which is marketable online. And but again, there's some good things happening around succession, and it's a matter of participating within it. One of the things that we hear a lot of, and it's coming up in a big way, and we're seeing the presence here in Happy Valley Goose Bay and in Labrador West, with Association for New Canadians setting up, and it's a clear strategy of all the Atlantic provinces to and federal and provincial governments and municipal to encourage immigration and to have policies and opportunities for immigrants to the communities. Will that work in small as well in rural and remote? It's a bigger challenge. It's but we know there's been successes here in terms of the positive impact that immigrants and foreign workers have had in Happy Valley Goose Bay. They've changed the face of the community in a positive way in many ways, and I think that's and the question then is the next step ownership. Are there opportunities where either investors, foreign investors can come in, or the immigrants that are working with businesses now might be in fact groomed to take over ownership of some of the businesses. There's some. We're at the early stage in this whole area of immigration and immigration policy, but I think the opportunities are there that we should really explore it. And Labrador and the northern tip of the Northern Peninsula are good areas for welcoming and providing that opportunity. And as I say, with the Association of New Canadians having a presence here, that's a positive step, but they've got to be integrated. They've got to work with all of you who are playing a key role in economic development in the region. So another thing that came up is a challenge for young people and newcomers to obtain the skill set to own and manage business enterprises. So, there is a gap between wanting to have a business and having the skills to run a business and to know, have some business training. You don't have to have a degree in business perhaps, but you're going to need some as much. So workshops, it may not be, degree courses are desirable, but right through to small workshops and encouraging the chambers and other organizations. And I know AMLO and a lot of organizations are doing work on that whole area, building capacity with women or with youth or with to get involved in businesses. And I think that's really needs to be encouraged, but also the opportunity exists to match so that we're not just talking the concept of taking over a business, but we've actually got some opportunities associated in the area, and it may be starting a new business, or maybe taking over a business, and maybe being able to work in a social enterprise, and we'll talk a little bit about that, because there's a big part of this region which is not just the private sector, but the important role that social enterprise plays. And so gearing up, having the kind of training for young people, where, I know this community is thinking about the post-muskrat era, and it's getting closer. Things will change, but there will be a lot of good people who are going to be available in the labor force. So what are the opportunities for those people in terms of training? And what are the business opportunities associated with that? In looking at it, I think that there are some good opportunities associated with either acquiring an existing business or starting a new one. And so being able to time the transfer of some of these people coming out who hopefully have a bit of cash left over from their experience of working in Muskrat or wherever, and are ready to take on a challenge themselves where they play a role in the ownership of the business. So the whole lead, and I know the College of North Atlantic is doing some work in this area of really trying to do some shifting to entrepreneurship training. And I'm at the business school, and there's some good work, really good work going on in terms of the whole area of social enterprise, of really understanding the importance that plays. And I think we need to attract some of the people up here, do some workshops, do some sessions to really help build capacity around this whole area of economic development and business planning. So an area that, we've got the right people in the room here to help support the discussion around this, but it became clear, as I traveled, and I was fortunate that it's a relatively small project and the travel budget was small, but I had other reasons to be in Labrador, so I was able to, I've been on all through the northern tip of the Northern Peninsula. I've been in the Labrador Straits. I was in Goose Bay here, Happy Valley Goose Bay a couple times. I was in Hopedale and I was in Lough West. And so I was able to do some face-to-face, even though I spent less than $2,000 in travel. So that's like buying a house and trying to get you do it on the cheap. But I think the thing that became clear, and even even if you're in Lough West or you're here, what is driving this economy? What's happening with it? What's possibly going to happen? What are the risks associated? What happens if Boise Bay doesn't go underground? We hardly recognize how important Boise Bay is to this community and to certainly the coastal communities, where a lot of people. It's probably the best PIBA agreement. I think Tim could support it, is that the benefit is amazing as to what Boise Bay has done to the communities. But what happens if Boise Bay doesn't go underground? And they're way late in terms of announcing any decision around whether they will or won't. So there's challenges, and we really need to start to look at economic data. Look at what is the impact of Boise's? What has been the impact of Muskrat? What does the iron ore gearing up in the Labrador Trough mean, and the other ventures that look like they may come, or some of them may come on stream? What's happening with the fishery? What's happening with the other contributors to the economy? And so there's some things that we can do around not only taking the population trends, but there's a lot of data, and Alvin can take the rest of today and tomorrow to talk to us about just how, how much data is out there, how it can be used, and what are some of the benefits of, and other regions are starting to do it. So taking regional data, collecting it and analyzing it and having it available to all of you as a tool in your planning and decision making. I think that's one of the most important outcomes perhaps of and the timing is right to do it. And we have, because the Harris Center is involved, and they have this project, the RenLab, and CBDCs are playing an important role with it. And there is some funding in place through ACOA that we look at the future of the economy in Labrador. That's a project that we should take a look at and analyze. How big is the economy here? I mean, Canadian Forces has 250 direct employees here, 300. So they're up to 500 impact in terms of, that's a steady major industry. If you travel in other parts, if we were doing this in the Cornbrook area, they don't have a lot of the stable or large kinds of businesses to the extent that Labrador has. And you take IOC, Boise Bay, Muskrat, and Canadian Forces alone, and then you add the Aboriginal economy along. You've got some pretty significant economic activity happening. But do we understand it, and how can we understand it? And so we'll throw open for some discussion about how that can happen. And I can't go away without talking about the sustainability of businesses. Businesses are closing, and there's a natural evolution. We've all liked the mom and pop businesses, and we all grew up with the mom and pop businesses, and they were important, and that's where you got your candy when you were a kid, or people stopped by and it was a place of conversation. And there's one community on the coast where 3 small mom and pops closed and 1 larger business opened, and it was a good natural, it appears to have been a good natural evolution for that community. So where the times are changing, location, the kind of services people want. On the Northern Peninsula, there's a lot of hardship for small communities, but there's a couple of communities that are sitting in the right location, and they will continue to do well. So the sustainable communities will lead to sustainable businesses. So the areas of youth retention and health and education services, of course broadband availability, a real sense of place, a sense of belonging, a pride. We all have and we know that the pride of being in Labrador and the pride of being a Labradorian it's a real asset. It does bring people back. It does help. And the communities are welcoming, and communities are changing, and we only have to pick up the paper every day to know that some communities don't seem to be as welcoming to different groups as others. Where there's one case now on the island where there's the community is getting a bad rap, perhaps, or a rap for not being as welcoming for all components of the community. And certainly there's some successes. The Monte Vista Peninsula has been showing that seasonally, at least, they're attracting young people back to the Monte Vista Peninsula. So what are our successes here, and what are some of the opportunities that we can pursue, which will lead to sustainable communities? So this isn't directly related to succession planning, but it is. It's about a future of a business, and a future of being able to attract employees to a business, and the future of being able to get new people to come into the business. So there's a couple of areas that I've identified that really, I think, need some more work, significant more work. When I bought that house for $4,500 in Happy Valley, the indigenous economy here was pretty small and dependent on seasonal and traditional forms of work. Now we have, there is a significant impact here, it really needs to be looked at as to the benefit of the indigenous groups, all of them contributing in a major way to a better place here for beneficiaries of those groups, but also for the communities, for this community generally. Happy Valley Goose Bay enjoys a location and a service, an important service to provide, and and it's important that Happy Valley Goose Bay certainly understand the role of the indigenous economy in this community and help support it. Also, it became clear that social enterprises have been a big factor here for a long time. When the shrimp licenses were given out, Romeo LeBlanc was the Minister of Fisheries, Len Cowley was the Deputy Minister of Federal Fisheries. There was meetings here of the Labrador Resource Council. Adjacency was a big issue, and shrimp licenses were allocated. That's over 35 years ago. Significant corporations were set up. These corporations have played a major role in terms of the economy. You look at the Labrador Fishermen's Union Shrimp Company, a huge, in a region which has got significant out-migration now and challenges in the population study. There is a solid economy based on the fishery and based on shrimp and crab that is serviced by that one company. And there's similar companies like Tongat Fisheries and the Innu Fisheries and Nunatuva. So there's opportunities to really, and all of these organizations have as a mandate to improve the well-being of fishermen and the communities that they live in. But they've got succession issues. These organizations were created 35, 40 years ago. They are ready, there's new blood, new training, new opportunities that need to be, new capacity building efforts that need to be had. And again, the School of Business is working in this area, and I think we should encourage them to come up and do some sessions and work with the sector. It tends, one of the things being back in St. John's, I see, is that the pilot projects are usually within an easy drive of St. John's. We're not dealing with an easy drive from St. John's here. And in tough times of travel costs and so on, we tend not to be the area that gets the pilot projects. But I think, if we take some initiative, we can be the area for some of the important pilot projects, and social enterprise is one of them. But certainly to study it and to look at it, and there's some good people around to help. The other is that became clear is transportation, and it's interesting because in the early creation of the Harris Center, and Dave Vardy, who wears a muskrat hat now, and Ron Sparks, Dave and Ron worked on a marine study for Labrador that was released in 2005. A very significant study, and that talked about the shifting marine needs in Labrador. So that was 13 years ago. The Trans-Labrador Highway was studied and was part of a forum. There was a major transportation forum which Rob Greenwood chaired with the Atlantic Provinces Transportation Commission, and was held in 2005, and the combined councils were involved in. Maybe we're due for another. Maybe we really need to look, because one of the things that became clear as I did this work is the Trans-Labrador Highway is changing Labrador, it's changing the Northern Peninsula. And if you're in certain locations, we all know it, if you're living in Lanse-Claire, you're nicely positioned close to the ferry to provide services. If you live in Plum Point on the Northern Peninsula, you're in a good position. But goods and services, what are the changing opportunities around goods and transfer of goods and the whole supply chain? Do we understand the supply chain, and how can we do that and do it better? And we know here that Arctic shipping is a an important opportunity that's been presented and needs to be explored. And the whole marine on the north coast and the capacity on the Strait of Lough, we know the Apollo has to be replaced. So having a major transportation forum may be and a real hard look at some good economic data of impact and study transportation and air access, marine and road. And as I say, this graph certainly shows what impact. For those of us, 10 years ago, or 2005, when the big transportation study was happening, there was very little known about what Labrador, with the impact of the Trans-Labrador Highway. Some of the projections were way off in terms of, in the Department of Transportation, trying to figure out how many people would actually use it. And we know as the pavement goes down, it gets used a lot. I was at the 2 seasons in twice in the last 6 months, and in Lough City, and each time there were people from Happy Valley loading up trucks at Walmart and coming back here. So that's a phenomenon that nobody would have imagined years ago. So that's what I really highlight what I got. The longer report is going to have a lot more in it, but I'd like to sort of get into a discussion or questions, and I think the fact that we've got some key people in the room here who can really help us on the next steps for research and where these might fit into existing. I'm sure there's some existing ideas that are already in the hopper that this will that might replace some of these or add to them, or the timing might be right. So we'll throw it open.
Good. Thank you, Dave. Thank you. So let's open the floor to any discussion, any points that you'd like to raise, any thoughts that you might have.
I guess those online can they email in, or will they can. My email is there on the screen, dilo@mun.ca. So any feedback would be appreciated for those of you who are joining us online.
Those of you who are involved in business planning, I'm sure Dave has spoken to many of you already, but what's your experience of the issue of succession planning here? Are people taking advantages of the services that you offer? What do you see as their particular concerns about this whole process?
I did a recent study for the Untitled government, but it was looking around offering a business program through college or the Memorial or whatever, and I interviewed quite a few businesses along the north coast of Labrador and some here in the Upper Lake Melville area. Their issue wasn't, there might have been succession issues, but their biggest issue was getting people that had a professional background or a business degree or even a bookkeeper to work inside of their business. So it was even at a more basic level than succession planning, it was about having skilled staff, employees, being able to recruit them and to have them work at their business.
There's a gap.
Came out of that there.
There's a gap. We shifted away, and having been involved in adult education, we shifted away as the mega projects came to trades, and so we trained more carpenters and welders and people that were able to get employment in the big projects, and that has worked. But the cycle is changing on that one now, and because there used to be more business programs offered than there is now, and I know the college is actually looking at their offerings, and the university is gearing up at the School of Business as well for that same reason.
Just as a comment too, I think the University itself, there was kind of a shift from entrepreneurship over to, I think, to more big business.
Sorry, I didn't hear that one.
They used to have, I can't remember the name of the program, they used to have more programs, I think that was geared towards small business and medium-sized businesses, but it seems with the big projects, it's shifted over to something that's not so relevant to us, you know?
Yeah. And certainly the Gardner Center, which is going to be involved, and if Rob can speak to there's a new center in the old Battery Hotel, which will be the Harris Center and the Gardner Center and some of the outreach functions of the university. But being able, the challenge has always been there's some really good courses going on, but you really have to get people to all the way into St. John's to take advantage of those programs, and that can be expensive. So identifying what are the ones that will be really helpful, and having some resources to bring up some of the instructors, and offering both short and longer term programs in business.
I'd echo one of John's points. One thing, when we're dealing with some of our smaller clients, small enterprises, the gap between bookkeeping services and then the jump to professional accounting, review engagements, there's a limitation often for most businesses of that size internal to their business, and trying to source a firm, and you mentioned earlier about acquisitions and larger firms coming in, so their client size is creeping to the medium-sized enterprise. So there's an opportunity, but there's a gap there that's not being addressed.
Right.
And there's a challenge for those businesses to find the services, particularly local.
Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing is, and it should be a recommendation in here, is that capacity for some skill sets in business, not necessarily directly related to succession, but to the sustainability of businesses and the startup of new businesses. Some of the skill sets required, especially around accounting or bookkeeping, and just understanding the tax system and all the things associated with running a small business would be valuable.
I have a question about you mentioned there were 18 case studies. I wonder if you could either elaborate a little bit maybe on your use of case studies, or maybe comment on overall numbers, like did you count business closures and openings and so forth?
Yeah, so there's not a lot of data available, so that's reason for the recommendation about we really need to collect more data. So a lot of it is, but I did identify in the sub-regions some businesses and tried to look at sectors, and tried to look, so it wasn't all about tourism businesses or about the logistics and supply businesses and so on. And some were retail, some were, so I tried to get a cross section of businesses, but a lot of it was anecdotal, and being able to just talk to people and say, yeah, well, we lost a business a couple of years ago because, in some cases, one of the things that happened in a couple of cases is some businesses sold to indigenous organizations, so there were private sector businesses and they sold. So that's part of the changing, we see that, and we've seen that in this town, and certainly there's opportunities there in terms of selling a business, not just to the private sector, but to the indigenous community, because there's more resources available now. And but back to your question, there wasn't a lot of good data available, so it was basically mapping out the regions and trying to look at some different sectors. And the report itself talks a lot about each of the regions and what's happening in the region. Because I think that's if there's a big takeaway from here, I think we really need to understand the region, the economics of this region better, for all of us that are involved in some way. It'll help with business planning. It'll help with going to the bank, going to see. Everybody needs more data available, and it isn't readily available.
If I can jump in there, Dave's cases show some very consistent trends in many respects. And there's a couple that I don't think you mentioned, but I'll throw them in here. If somebody's going to transfer a business to somebody else, not a family member, for example, then very often that person doesn't have the money to be able to put up the ante, as it were, for the business, or to service the debt associated with it. And so I think in a lot of your cases, you found that the business owner had to retain an interest in the business for a fair period of time to allow the new owner-operator to be able to get on their feet, establish the business, and then move forward. But from my reading of Dave's report is that a lot of business owners don't anticipate that at all. And that's in part one of the reasons it takes a long time, not to find somebody, but to actually move out of the business. And they don't anticipate that kind of thing. So I think that, you know, as a general conclusion from some of those case studies, that's one of the things that I got as a takeaway from that. Then Dave's talked about it already, but valuation. There's I think a tendency for my business is absolutely crackerjack, right? It's worth a lot more than you think it is. Well, that's a bit insulting, and you know that there's a realization process that may take some time to come into play as well. I felt that from. I had a lot of sympathy for the owners, but the reality is that it often isn't as worth as much as people would like to think it is.
It's a good point.
Or even if it is worth that, you can't service that kind of
They
debt.
can't service it.
Because somebody had built it up over the course of 20 or 30 years.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it might be worth that, but you never service the debt on the.
Yeah. And that was clear in a couple of instances that you may have felt that it's worth $750,000, but a business can't handle that debt, and unless it's going to grow, significantly from the cash that's coming in now.
I've seen other places where owners would finance just to get it out of the business. They'd be a part of the financing package. People seem hesitant to do that here. Did you see that? Was there any of that in any cases that you saw?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and to that point, that almost the success rate, if an owner stays in the business for a few years and works with the new buyer, that the success rate improves significantly. And but that may not be what the owner had in the back of their mind. But then we've got to counsel the owners to say, well, maybe if you're going to sell your business, think about it 5 years ahead of time. Don't think about it this spring because you've had enough and you're ready to go. Allow time, and then the valuation of it's not what you need. A lot of people say, well, I need $750,000 to retire, and I was counting on the sale of the business to provide that. Well, if you're only going to get $250,000 for the sale, then your expectations have gone through a major change. And so people need to think about those things ahead of time. That's why the discussion, that's why it's got to happen around tables and people thinking about it and being realistic. A business, somebody will say, well, business just like mine sold in Truro for $750,000, but if I'm in West St. Modeste, it's a different environment. So the other thing that besides for retaining some ownership, the owner retaining some ownership, and funding agencies like that, that's a sign of some stability, and also the equity, and also helps address some of the debt issue. So you might be able to get a better price if you stay with the business for a few years and generate the cash for the business. So that really is a good option. Another thing that I saw is that in some cases, you know, there was one company in mining logistics. Well, the mining logistics business is pretty slack right now, so there was a lot of assets, but it was easier to sell off parts of the business and retain some parts of the business. So the owner actually sold off a lot of assets, but kept some parts of the business. So it's a gradual withdrawal from business, but you know, and timing is sometimes right. You got a building and somebody else is interested in that building, and maybe it's another use for that building, but maybe that's the way to go. And so that option worked. And you know, in the cases of businesses that had some flexibility and did a lot of discussion, that was one of the success stories. In terms of the, I'd like a bit of feedback, if we could, on the research needs before we finish up, and the regional economic data. Is that for? Do we agree that, or do people feel that the need for more work done on regional economic data? Is this a priority? And you know, maybe we should talk a little bit about. I wouldn't mind taking a second, and Alvin, maybe you're the guy to do it. But give us an example of what was done in another region that possibly could be done here.
Yeah, okay. Actually, we're involved in several initiatives. One's with the CDC, actually, which you're aware of.
We're on your list, I think.
Yeah, I think you're on our list, but I don't
I
think
don't know how far down we are.
Did you send us anything?
Vicky is the executive director. She's handling that.
Yeah, we haven't received.
No.
If we received our local data, we would have given you your report.
Right, but
Yeah.
they tell us when we have to send it.
Yeah, we're waiting for it. We have 11 done already.
Yeah.
You know, 11 reports out there. What we actually do with the CBDC is we look at the citrus data investigated over time, usually from we started around early 2000s or whatever, 10 years of data. Then we look at the whole regional economy, and we look at how it's linked through supply chains and the value chains of that and whatever. And then what we actually do, we look at how much of what a business needs can get locally, how much it's got to bring in. And we look at the supply side of the business, like commodities you need to operate, then the market side. So how much of what you produce or services you provide gets consumed locally, or how much goes outside of the region, and so on and stuff like this. We give local multipliers. So like, for example, let's say in the food service sector, let's say potentially you get $1.60 spillover for every dollar you put into that business. But say locally, because you're importing a lot of stuff, you're only realizing $1.20. But we identify what the gaps are, and is it reasonable for that to be produced here, you know, sort of thing, right? So we do a complete work down of the economy. That's with the CBDCs. And we look at the impact of their investments, and we've been pretty impressed in that what CBDC does, in many cases, companies they've invested in, for every dollar they've invested, those companies in some cases are generating $5 or $6 in GDP. So they're investing smartly, and they're investing in industries that are growing and have a big impact. The other thing, which I was hoping that somebody would be here from the municipality happy about Goose Bay today, we have another initiative which is actually beneficial to municipalities, and I think everybody Goose Bay is part of the M&L Advisory Urban Council. I think they are on that board. Yeah. So at the end of the day, we have a 2-year program with ACOA, M&L, and RANLAB, and that we usually ask, so we ask a town to give us a list of businesses that are in your town that are either, we don't know what they want, if they're paying tax or not, as long as you're a business list or somehow registered with the town. We take all that data and all the tax dollar data that we buy, we're updated from, we have standardized data sets from 2001 to 2017 right now. We just updated the 2017 data. We're about 6 months behind the economy, so we know pretty much what's going on. And we run that through. We have what is called a geospatial supply chain model that can do impacts in terms of job spillovers, the footprint of an economy or a business, and as well as the value of it, you know, in terms of wages, other commodities it buys locally and what it brings in and all that other stuff, and what the connections are and all that other stuff. So we can generate local multipliers, not provincial ones. And basically the idea behind that, and what ACOA wants to do, because actually ACOA has been very supportive of us. As a matter of fact, it took us about 7 or 8 years to build this analytics that we're using right now. And ACOA supported a lot of the initial developments on that, you know, sort of thing. And they still support it in a way. And we're eventually going to put this online. So the CBDCs can go on and get live data and live updates. Municipalities or businesses. We also work with private enterprise. I'm sort of a person that thinks that, you know, you got to work from the ground up on everything, and that is local business, local organizations, and stuff like this. You know, it's not a top-down thing at all. But eventually, and ACOA has told me, the head of ACOA here in St. John's has told me that they would support this initiative, and we're now moving forward to have all the stuff that we're doing to be made available online. So you can go and profile your own place. And we want to put a bunch of tools in there. You can actually profile something that you want to do in terms of a policy, a concept, like it could be a business or whatever, and see what impact it's going to have locally. And that's the ultimate goal. Like Roseanne, Leonard, and myself, like the CBC is really keen on this, because you go in and ask for a loan for a small business, and they say, yep, there's an identifiable gap here, and you can have this impact, but you need to be this big and not this big, like, you know, sort of thing. Like a micro business, no, you could be actually a small enterprise and actually fill that capacity gap that's there, you know, sort of at the end of the day. And we are at that stage. Like, we have the engine, you know, sort of thing. Now it's making the outcomes available and the whole visualization thing and the interaction part. That's for coders to do, you know, sort of. But we now do projects. We write up local reports. We provide a database to a CBDC or a municipality. And basically, you know, what we're doing right now, the municipal ones is more for regional development planning. Initially, the CBDCs were for investment, you know, sort of thing, right? But actually, because of the gap that was left behind when the RIBDs disappeared and stuff like this, people are looking to CBDCs as for advice and for development stuff and things like this as well, and trying to fill that gap to a degree. And as a matter of fact, you know, sort of thing, somebody's got to fill the gap, you know, at the end of the day. And now the regionalization process that the government's going to propose, we have no idea what that's going to look like. That's something that's down the road, you know, sort of thing, and we'll see it when it comes out. And, you know, but what we find, for example, in the CBDC regions that we've done all 11, like for example, in Training Conception, we found 3 sub-regions within the CBDC that have sort of separate economies, but they're linked, but they're really distinct, you know, sort of thing. And we found, like in Avalon West, there was 3 or 4, Alberta was 3 or 4, Long Range. These are all CBDC names, by the way. You'll be familiar with them. See, this is what happens when you dive into the stuff. You start to, you think in those ways. But at the end of the day, you know, sort of thing, what we want to do and what we're looking for eventually is that people that are involved in these sorts of things, and this is a social enterprise, is not there, and one of the reasons they got involved is that this will never be a private sector service. It will be a narrow center social thing that goes out and benefits everybody. You know, whether it's private industry who wants to pay for access and use it for their purposes or whatever. Okay, so, and the idea is, I can ask you right now, if you go online with the new Stats Canada stuff, which is what we've been looking at recently, and it's an amazing set of database there. But for the average person going to their best data, it would take you weeks because of these multi-dimensional data sets. If you work with StatCan, you use the 2020 data set, you're trying to combine all this stuff together and then make sense of it. What we want to do, we have interfaces that can take all that, suck it in, do some value added, and give out not only the baseline data, but also value added data about what's going on in the economy and other things as well, along with the other stuff. So at the end of the day, you know, sort of thing, I think for rural places with the challenges that are coming, we did a report actually for COA and OECD on small, medium-sized enterprises in Atlantic Canada. I don't think the report saw the light of day because it went to Moncton. And in Moncton, I guess what happens in Moncton stays in Moncton. But it's a very long report, and actually what we did there, we divided Atlantic Canada up into these functional economic regions. So a first order rural in New Brunswick will be similar to a first order rural in Newfoundland, And a third order row, which is really small places, would be the same remote places that you would find in New Brunswick or Nova Scotia, but not the same degree of remoteness because of geography, but they would match up pretty good. And we did a whole thing of characterizing SMEs in Atlantic Canada. And maybe I should post it up on the Yarrow Center website. I was never told I couldn't publish it.
He's not very passionate about this work.
No.
That's
You know
the
what I
first
mean?
thing.
Trouble with company.
Yeah, really, yeah.
But anyways, you know, the end game in this is that what is the most frustrating thing is that there's a lot of information out there that are useful for small and medium-sized enterprises. There's information out there for regions, for operators like CBDC and ACOA, but the difficulty of getting some of that data in an organized place gives you information. You know, there are lots of data out there, but lots of data doesn't mean there's information attached to it that's actually meaningful. It's about what goes on inside the economy. Like I quickly looked at actually some stuff before I came here this morning, and I was looking at the mining support sector in this town. It's big money and a lot of connections. You know, sort of a lot of stuff comes in with sea transport, you know, sort of thing, whatever. And then some stuff goes to Lough West, some stuff goes to Voices Bay, and all this other stuff that goes on. And it is a big part of the economy. You know, sort of. And we saw the spikes that happened when Muskrat Falls started up. And it's kind of intriguing, actually, in a way, because, you know, but there are also other things that happened there. Someone was mentioning about small, medium-sized enterprises. One of the problems that we've seen when we were doing our work was the fact in some cases the volatility, especially in micro businesses, like they go up and down in the market. Like, for example, if there were a small business developed, say, in relation to Muskrat Falls, when it goes, they'll probably go. That they react so instantaneously to an upturn and downturn. And we developed a thing that we want to use when we get online. It's called the volatility index for a certain sector for sectors in the economy of different sizes. And we look over time to see how they behave and react to cycles in the economy. So it'd be like a risk factor. You know, you know that they'll be doing good if the cycle's 5 years, and they'll do good for 5 years. But the odds are that after that 5-year cycle is over, they will exit. But maybe there'll be another opportunity and another type of small enterprise will come in and take over that enterprise. You know, sort of thing, right? So we've been diving into this for about 10 years and stuff, and our focus is on Newfoundland and Labrador, like, you know, sort of thing. And we've pretty well covered every nook and cranny at this point, you know, sort of thing, including Labrador. We haven't put it out publicly because at the end of the day, we weren't ready to go public with a lot of this stuff, but we're there now. And the opportunities that we partnered up with ACOA and M&L so that municipalities can actually help to build up this big data. And the idea is this, okay, at the end of the day, you should be able, a business in Valley Goose Bay or CBDC that's located here, or an entrepreneur or whatever, should be able to go into a database and say, where am I in this big Newfoundland economy, supply chain? Well, what is my position in it? And if I do, what is the ripple effect if I shut this down here? If that gets shut down, what is the ripple effect here in Abbott Valley Goose Bay? And we did a piece of work, Jesus, how many, 5, 6 years ago, my God. We looked at the importance of the R&R industry in Lough West. And of course, 95% of the benefit goes to Lough West. But you know, there's a little trick we fix that you can go to St. John's, you know, for financing and insurance and some other things that go on there or whatever. A lot of stuff go over, like amazing the connections between Maritimes and Lough West when the mines were up and going. Like there was stuff coming out of Bathurst and exchanges going on between Lough West. We detected all of that and we went on the ground and checked it out, and sure enough, you know, the linkages were there. So we knew our model was doing its job, you know, certainly at the end of the day. And one of the things that happened in that, we also follow commodity prices. And what we want to do online, if there's a commodity price that affects your economy, you will get a red flag one morning when you log in and say, do you know, futures on this is sliding down at 15%. And you say, well, who's going to be impacted by this? And call a list of businesses that could be impacted by this.
There's a lot of good stuff going on.
Right. So that's where we are.
Dave's work.
But we've been silent for 10 years because it took us that long to develop these tools. And we did it from scratch.
So what's the next steps to do it here?
Okay, for here, what we want to do, initially what we're doing now is working with CBDCs and doing those initial profiles and giving them first baseline data so they can start looking at stuff. And as a matter of fact, Roseanne Leonard has been very aggressive on this with the CBDC. And we're looking now at even having workshops maybe in the fall, where when we get together, myself and Jamie will run sometimes workshops about how to use this information that we're giving them right now. We brought up reports, and I think reports really could be an online thing where all the information and tools are explained and examples given. We want to put rules in, so when you make this, when you're doing decision making, you know, like when CBC makes a decision, like how do you make a decision about this or that or whatever, we build that rule in, so really, you know, you want to know risk factors and all that other stuff, that comes into play, you know, sort of thing. And so we're about 2 years from that going live, but we're at the point right now, I mean, we can only deal with so much, you know, sort of, and that's why we were very selective in targeting with the CBDCs first, and now we're at the municipalities, but the municipalities are only those that have a certain size and that are on the urban council, you know, sort of thing, right?
Committee.
Yeah, committee, yeah, exactly.
So what's that size and representation for Labrador?
Well, that would be
Over 3,000.
Over 3,000.
yeah, over 3,000. Well, Abbey Valley Goose Bay will be there, Lab West will be there,
Wow.
and all you got to do, I'm going to be at the M&L meeting next week, and hopefully there'll be people there from Abbey Valley Goose Bay and so on, is that they can say, well, we're interested in doing this, and it's I think it's a 70-cent dollar. Like what's going to cost the city? Like I mean, we did it with Bonavista Vista North, and it cost each community that participated in it, you know, about $300. You know, sort of.
Has there been a Labrador community that municipalities step forward to participate?
Not yet, you know, sort of thing, but we haven't really pushed the announcement on this until, you know, May the 5th in Gander, you know, sort of thing. So, but it is, and we're hoping over the next 2 years to have covered most of those, you know, sort of thing. That's the ambition to start with.
Thanks, Alan.
Okay, sorry, didn't mean to go on that long, but
So
find an off button
so
somewhere.
you can have,
If
the
you
bottom,
can.
the bottom line is you'll have a full report for us by the end of May?
Or you go right ahead and dream on that.
Well, what is a realistic timeline? Let's say a priority was put on a Labrador piece to be done. What's a realistic?
It would be the end of fall at this point.
Okay, it's achievable in this year, sometime
Oh, yeah.
later this year.
Yeah, but you would have to get on early because there's people
There's a
starting.
lineup.
They're starting to line up sort of. Because we're almost finished with the CBDC, but the CBDC now has become we have a template for the CBDCs that we were working on with Roseanne, so we turn those over fairly quickly. The
And this will be-
municipalities one is that we're working on a template, and once we get that done, you know, sort of thing, right? It'll be a bit better.
What's unique about this economy is that there's a couple of major driving
Yeah.
forces. So
Oh, yes.
the Labrador information is going to be very different than
Oh, yes.
many of the other
Yeah.
areas, because you've got the IOCs and the
Yeah.
Boise Bays and the
Well, you
Canadian
got lots of large enterprises, right,
forests
which you don't have in.
and the indigenous economy. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a big
Yeah,
player. So
yeah.
you put all those together, and
Yeah.
this is a very different region.
Yeah, it's surprising sometimes though when you see the emergence of mega projects, is a number of little holding companies that pop up all over the place. You know, people are trying to have one company to start another one, but they floated money through the holding company and stuff like this. It's kind of interesting how things get diverted.
And what about post-Muskrat? And,
Yeah, exactly. As a matter
analyzing
of
what
fact,
Muskrat did.
one of the things we've been talking about that is that we got local information. We can actually run the model with Muskrat Falls in the economy, then we can remove it. And just see what the fallback, what the downfall would be, or what the spillover would be on that.
You said you could notice the blip of muskrat.
Yeah.
Can you do a comparative analysis, like year over year?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. That's why we got 17 years of data standardized at the moment.
Yeah?
You know, like for example, we've seen in some places, someone talking about, actually Dave was kind of interesting. You talked about where someone bought 2 or 3 micro businesses or small businesses and made it into one big one. We actually noticed that emerging when things got to a certain competition level, that the weaker small businesses got disappeared, but another business appeared with more employees and bigger, but only one of them, as opposed to 4.
Yeah.
You know, sort of thing. And we've seen that trend in many rural areas in the province already.
So the actual business count is smaller, but
Yeah,
the
but
employment.
but their concentration is more concentrated. But then you become a sort of, you know, one industry in one sector, you know, sort of thing, which can also be risky.
But Dave, another piece to that is that there is research too that has been done, and it's not in any central place. So I think Untitled recently had a supply chain analysis done. That's in their offices, but it's not available to anybody else. I don't know if they'll have the institute or it'll be a place to have that. The the Labrador Ministers Advisory Council on Transportation recently produced a report. So there's some things that I suspect aren't there and easily accessible to people, but could be at some place and may just supplement some of the other decision making that people are doing, and just being able to see some of these reports.
Good. We had supply chain analysis on the Muscat Falls project done as well, right?
Right.
Yeah. For both Muscat Falls as well as Valley going underground.
Yeah, I'd like to see that supply chain, actually. Well, we generate our own from data, from tax water data and other stuff as well, right? So it'd be interesting to see it. If we could sometime, Tim.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
I'm gonna,
Oh, sorry.
that's all right, we're gonna, as you know, we've got another session starts at 3 o'clock on housing in central Labrador. So what I'd like to do is just to ask if anybody else has got anything that they would like to
I've got a quick comment.
contribute.
Yeah. With our department, Advanced Education, Skills and Labor, I often think about post-Muskrat, in particular with the non-straight people that are going over working in janitorial or, whatever the case, just going over and doing labor type work and coming to our office to potentially be retrained come the end of Muskrat, because of course we have the partnership with Service Canada and the skills development funding that we have that could be of use if they're eligible. And I don't know, somehow that would be an interesting way to create an opportunity with this project and SMEs in Labrador, and potentially planning now to kind of, have information sessions or forums where the individuals that may be interested in retraining or training for the first time can be set up, or connected with employers that may want to grow and potentially do some succession planning with people in the future. Yeah.
That's really good.
Okay. Tim?
I had to leave because we're going into a fisheries meeting, but and we need data on that as well. But I'm keenly interested in the future research opportunities, particularly the interest economy, the impact, and the transportation. On the transportation side, I know we've been pressuring the provincial government, and Mr. Ball, because during the campaign, he did commit to doing a feasibility study on the Trans-Labrador Highway going into our territory, and he seems to have forgotten that since he got elected. So we've been reminding him of that, and forums and studies is sometimes a good way to keep the ball rolling.
Good.
We need the highway to roll into our territory.
Right. Yeah.
So we're keenly interested.
Thank you. Anybody else like to add anything? Dave, can I leave the last word with you?
Yeah, so certainly the next step is just to, feedback from here will be integrated. If you've got some feedback that's my email, and if you think of something in the next few days, or if you've got a report or something you think would be useful to tag on to this, that would be good as well. Those of you online, if you've got any kind of feedback, this was bigger than succession planning because it deals with the survival of businesses and economic development. But I think some of these recommendations, in particular on the further research, will really support small business and the future of small business, and so some kind of stability. But it'll influence training, it'll influence a whole bunch of areas. So thanks for the opportunity to present, and look forward to some feedback. And the final report will be issued through Rob sometime in May. Thank you.
Thank you.